is the broadcasting legend Mike Tirico joining us on the D&M Leasing Hotline here on The Fan. Good morning, Mike. How are you, sir?
Shan and Bobby, morning. How we doing? Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. What does Jim Nantz the other day said, the winner of Bills-Lions, it's time for them to be America's team. How do you define America's team?
I don't care. I don't. Maybe it's getting too old, or maybe it's watching too much of the noise on TV in the mornings. I've stopped investing any emotional energy in circular conversations that don't mean a damn thing. I'd rather talk about offensive lines and all that stuff. I mean, the whole America's team thing was generations ago, and we understand it. The Cowboys have always had a great appeal across the country because of the 5 Super Bowls, because of more playoff games than anyone. So it's just developed generations of Cowboy fans. You know, the team America likes at the moment, the Lions and Bills, are great to root for. So too would a Cleveland be. I know what Jimmy said. I love Jim. Jim's a friend. I love him. I know exactly what he's saying. Like the team that America is rooting for, pulling for, because they'd like to see, I think we all like to see, teams that don't win get a chance on that big stage and have their moments. Those are great stories. But, like, dude, we don't walk around with a trophy saying who's America's team at the moment. So I invest zero energy into such conversations. Cowboys will always draw. They still do, and I'm sure I have a bunch of people watching Sunday night.
There's been a lot of growing momentum, kind of starting with Jerry on this program, about Mike McCarthy returning. Then you have Aikman and Dak and Micah all coming out. What are your thoughts, and how do you approach that when you do the McCarthy sit down, and just your overall thoughts on Mike's status?
No, hell, I've been doing this with Mike for 19 years on and off. So there's certainly, a trust, I think, a professional relationship, and Chris is with me as well. I'm sure we can ask Mike a question, get an honest answer, and he wants to keep going, right? So there's not much for him to say, right? And it's not for us to make the decision on what Jerry and Steve and everybody else see going forward. You try to look at facts, and to coach a team to 12 plus wins for 3 straight years, that's a fact, right? To know that injuries on both ends of that derailed seasons, that's a fact. I see a very positive in how the team has played here down the stretch. Yes, the competition has not been as good as the competition earlier in the season, but with a number 2 quarterback, we see teams just fall off the map, and that has not happened twice now here with Mike. So I look at that. I look at a guy who is tied for, I think, 13th now in wins in the NFL. The guy knows how to win. He's produced winners. He produces a good program. Where the questions were this year is, why was the defense so bad early on? Was it, once you lost Micah in there, that changed a lot of things. Now when he comes back, you see a lot of positives. A defense that's statistically really good here in the stretches, especially the number of sacks since Mike has come back. Missing DeMarcus Lawrence, the guys who changed over. So I think what you really have to assess, what I would assess, is how much of that slow start on defense, injury-related, yes, also personnel getting adjusted to Zimmer compared to what they had with DQ. A lot of that goes into it. I think in the overall, you have to look at this. What's the market? Who's out there? Are you upgrading at head coach? Or are you resetting and restarting the wheel? Does this group deserve one more shot after one bad year? That's the question that only Jerry and Steve and everybody else can answer. I like Mike McCarthy as head coach of my football team. I always have. I thought they were always well prepared. I thought you had the best chance to win football games. And if it was up to me, given the extenuating circumstances of losing key players during the season, I'd keep it going. I do think there's a bigger issue. And the bigger issue is having 3, assuming Micah resigns, having 3 big-ticket players in the salary cap. That limits the amount of talent you can have on the rest of a football team. That's the thing that concerns me. And guys, I'm sorry to belabor this, that might lead you to keeping Mike because Mike has dealt with that in Green Bay. Green Bay was a draft and developed, not a lot of free agent teams, and those teams played well. That might be a tipping point to keep Mike if you know that we're going to be paying Dak, CD, and Micah in the top 1, 2, or 3 at their position as we go into the next couple of years.
Well said. And Stephen Jones created a lot of waves in bringing up that salary cap point the other day. Mike Tirico here on 105.3 The Fan. I just want to ask you a side question, since you're a Michigan guy, about Ben Johnson. I don't know if you guys get to sit down a lot with the coordinators. My whole thing about Ben Johnson is, like, what is his, because he's the number one sexy pick for everybody.
Yep.
What is his personality? How would he run a team? How would he lead a team? We know about the X's and O's, the Great Lions offense. Yeah. Do you know anything about Ben Johnson?
I do. I've been around him a bit, living here in Michigan and covering the Lions. Gosh, I guess we've had him 5 times in their last year plus.
Yeah. 2
playoff games last year and a couple of times this year, and then I was over at camp this year as well. Ben's a really good guy. His players like him. His offensive players like him. Look, he brings creativity and energy to it. You never know what a guy's personality is going to be like when facing the media after losing a game where a special teamer happens to touch a punt because they didn't know what happened and they were just acting on instinct, right?
Yeah.
Those are the things that often the crises are often what define your coaches short, medium, and long term. And we haven't seen Ben Johnson handle a crisis in front of the media. It doesn't mean that behind the scenes, when your offense is struggling, you deal with the mini stuff, right? What everyone has said is very positive. Ben Johnson's lack of a head coaching job at this very second is purely based on his desire to stay here and see this out in Detroit and not go to a place where he didn't feel everything was in alignment or he wasn't ready. So all positives. I would not blink for a second if I owned a team. Well, if I owned a team, I'd be blinking a lot because I'd be sitting in the sun. I wouldn't blink for a second if Ben was my head coach. Not at all.
Mike, I'm curious, you mentioned 19 years now that you've had interactions with Mike McCarthy from Green Bay into Dallas. And a lot of the discussion when Mike McCarthy came here was just the culture shock of, boy, being the head coach for the Packers and in that community compared to Dallas is so radical and so different. How have you seen McCarthy evolve, I guess, in terms of his perspective of what it means to coach the Cowboys or to handle this job over the 5 years that he's been here?
Yeah, and I'm going to double down on this. Let me answer your question, then I'll double down on it a bit. I think Mike figured it out right away. I really do. Especially, he understands things are different, right? It's the only team where the owner / president / GM talks to the media before you do as the head coach. So sometimes you're in there playing defense against what your boss said without knowing what your boss said, or maybe just hearing it and not getting to process it. Right? That's a hard deal, and it's different than anybody in any sport has. And you mentioned Jerry and Stephen coming on the station here, which is great. Look, Jerry has said openly, if we're talking about the Cowboys, it's a good thing, right? It's the old no publicity is bad publicity. And that changes the calculus of everything that head coaches deal with. Because head coaches usually set the tone for the organization, what they say in the media, how they project in the media. Look at Dan Campbell a day or two ago in Detroit, where he went out there and used a couple of expletives to just say, we're staying the course here, guys. There's a pity party, sure, for losing 21 players on defense, or 21 players total, a bunch on defense. But the season's not over. Like, we're going to keep going out and give it our best. That was messaging to the team, in addition to the fan base and the guys hosting the show. So you can't do that to the same extent when the owner and the GM and the number 2 in charge are on doing that all the time. But Mike figured that out. Mike knows that. Mike has adjusted to that, which is a good thing. And that's why I think when you look at head coaches in Dallas, you need to have one of 2 things. Somebody who has been a head coach, understands what the fire's like. Think of Jimmy, think of Parcells, think of Switzer, right? Think of the guys who've been around it and had that head coach understanding of how to manage stuff, and we're not going to let this little thing rattle us.
Yeah.
Or, like Jason, a guy who was around and understood the dynamic. And that's where I was going to add to your question. Doing the Thanksgiving night game with Jason, who, by the way, is the best guy in the world.
Yeah.
And by the way, like, you go back and listen to the games that I've done with Jason. Jason does a tremendous job in the booth doing it. I've had so much fun and learned so much doing it. We had a blast on Thanksgiving night in Green Bay. Being around Jason and understanding that, you got to understand this is a different job. And if you don't have the temperament of a Jason Garrett or the experience of a McCarthy or the other guys I mentioned, I think it's a hard job. It's a hard job for the young, hot guy to come in and figure out, because there is an extra dimension to figure out.
Mike Tirico, NBC, he'll have the call of Cowboys, Buccaneers. We'll have the radio side, 105 through the Fan. Mike, we have said Tampa Bay may be the most difficult team for us to figure out. Dangerous. They lose 4 in a row. They come back there on a 4-game winning streak. What are the Bucs?
They're good. I think they're good. I think their offense is very good. And you're talking young offensive coordinators and guys who are good. Liam Cohen is right there. And Liam Cohen's name will be on the list here, if not this year, next year, for guys who get interviews for head coaching jobs. Because remember, this was an offense that was driven, defined by Godwin and Evans, 2 very good receivers. Mike Evans is putting up a Hall of Fame over 100 touchdown catch career here.
Yeah.
And then they go out. And so they've got to pivot. And now they pivot to young running backs and an offensive line that they kind of acquired many of the pieces during the Brady days, developed a couple, and they have stayed the course and now helped this team turn it around. And same thing like Dallas, last 4 games on defense, they've been much better. Todd Bowles has them giving up 15, 16 a game. So both sides of the ball have had to do a little bit of a pivot, and offensive was injury-driven in the first middle chunk of the season, let's say, because they got off to a good start. Heck, they beat Detroit and Philadelphia at the start of the season. Nobody else can say that in the NFL. And as they've kind of pivoted here through their midseason struggles, it's a good football team, solid football team, looking to close strong and win the division. They'll be a tough out at home if they win the South, and they'll be a tough out on Sunday night for the Cowboys.
Mike, while we have you, I have to take advantage of your all-around sports knowledge and ask you 2 non-Cowboy questions. The first is, how stunned are you, and why is Bill Belichick in college?
Interesting. First off, I would guess that the noise of not many people inquiring softly about the NFL was real.
Yeah.
And I think Bill wants to coach. And I think the way college is right now, Bill's approach is perfect. If you want to be an NFL player, come here, period. NIL money will come because of Belichick. Carolina's got a significant alumni base that they can dip into that wants to be around something that's a winner and successful. Carolina's had a good program at different points in the past. And if you think of the schools that have turned out the NFL guys, look at the rosters of any NFL team. Bunch of Bama guys, bunch of Georgia guys off the championship teams, significant number of Clemson guys. Guys want to be in the NFL, so that's where they want to go. And in this day and age where you no longer have to just recruit, you can have annual free agency with the absolute stupidity that college football has become, ruined by a bunch of folks sitting on the side of the road with no guardrails put up. You can go in and do this. So Bill can be a free agent and sign a bunch of guys, or a free agent coach and sign a bunch of guys who he wants right away, as opposed to, I've got the 17th pick in the draft, I've got to wait for somebody to fall for me. So that, plus his desire to coach. Look, do I think he wanted to set the all-time coaching wins thing? Of course. That's why he did all the interviews last year. That's why he was down the road. But when you see that there aren't a lot of people making these quiet reach outs to, hey, maybe we should talk at the end of the year, you don't want to sit on the side of the road the next year. Great place to live, tie with his dad that he talked about, ability to coach people, make a ton of money. Why not? I think it was brilliant by Carolina's folks, whoever drove it on their side. And I think it's good for college football because it'll have that energy like Dion brought to Colorado, where everybody wants to see what Carolina does at the start of next season.
And then finally, Mike, baseball had this issue. They addressed it with some changes. People are now taking that discussion to basketball and the NBA.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the quote-unquote NBA problem right now.
Well, before we answer that, do you guys like the idea of you can put anybody up at any point in a baseball game? That rule that they're talking about?
No.
I mean, let's stop. What are we doing? I was okay with the ghost runner at second in extra innings, so we don't burn through a bullpen on a 19-inning game in August. I got that. That makes some logical sense. Like changing the order of the lineup, it's like it's akin to it's an NBA rule that's fun, it's entertaining, but I don't love it when you can advance the ball after a timeout in the last 2 minutes. Well, that's great. Can you imagine if it was football? You can call a timeout, and McCarthy will now take the ball at the opponent's 25-yard line. What happened? What happened in the first 46 minutes of the game we play in the NBA? That always has driven me nuts. But to your point, yes, there are too many three-pointers taken by some teams, but I lived through the San Antonio Nets NBA Finals when it was in the Pacers-Nets Conference Finals in 2003. And if you need to dust that off, it was, I think, 39-35 at half. The basketball was so dry. It was like 74-72 late in games. You go, this is bad. The product was really bad at that point. At least this product is entertaining. It's up and down. What happens is in the playoffs, we get less of this, right? And think back to the finals. Games kind of in conference finals. Games come back to half-court games.
Yeah.
When the money's down, right? So it's part of the regular season. I don't know if you can legislate how many threes you can take. Could you bump the line back a foot? Of course you can. Change the percentages. But guys will continue to adjust. We have better athletes. The game needs to be tweaked because the court is still as wide as it was when Bob Cousy played and those guys. So we need to make adjustments in general in the game. But I don't think the game is all that broken at this point. I think you're just going through, if you're looking at the ratings-only causation of this, I think you're looking at just a wave of players like Giannis and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and other players being on teams that aren't the highest profile teams. Boston's terrific. Philly has struggled. The Knicks have changed characters. There's a lot of changing teams, and you don't develop guys out of college to the NBA as future stars. It's why it took Luka a couple of years to become a national star. It's why it took Jokic a couple of years to become a national star. But now they're there, and when they're on, you want to watch them. So I think it's just a cyclical thing. It's not overreact. And let's not say, hey, the number 8 hitter's up. Let's bring in the cleanup hitter to hit a grand slam in the 9th inning. Just pump the brakes and calm down. I think it's going to be all right.
Incredible as always. Thank you so much, Mike. We appreciate you, man. Have a great call Sunday.
Great to be on with you guys. Happy holidays. We look forward to being down there this week, and we wish everybody all the best. We'll talk to you in 2025.